Hi, I'm Bearhart, and this is Kirsten. Say hi, Kirsten.
Howdy.
And behind the camera and at the controls back here, we have the lovely Ricky.
Hi, Ricky.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I fooled her. And this is Bearhart Labs presents the International Geek of Mystery show.
Woo!
I don't know why I named it with so many words, but there you go. And today we're going to talk about my experience as a teenager working as an engineer at a NASA subcontractor and working on the Voyager program. The Voyager program was 2 spacecraft. The first one was Voyager 2 and the second one was Voyager 1 for reasons that I'll never understand.
They never explained that to you.
Oh, I think what happened is that they were designed in a certain order, but they were launched in a different order. I mean,
Okay.
I'm sure it was explained and I didn't really necessarily
In one
pay
ear, out
attention.
the other. Yeah, that checks
That
out for
wasn't
you.
as interesting to me as the work was. The work was very interesting to me at the time. Today, the Voyager spacecraft, both of them, are out beyond what they consider the boundary of the solar system. And over the years, I've followed their progress as they, crossed the orbits of our 9 planets. Yes, Jupiter or Pluto is a planet.
That'll have to be a whole other topic.
I will never accept Pluto's demotion from planet to something else. And out past the understood barriers of the solar system, which to me has always been like a source of excitement and pride that I had anything to do with that. The small part that I had to do with it. But I want to start with a little bit of background. How does a 17-year-old, ask the question you ask.
How does a 17-year-old get hired on as an engineer for NASA?
I want to just correct the impression. I worked for a subcontractor called Merit Inc. in Santa Monica, and they were under contract from NASA.
Got it.
And
Okay.
I did work on that particular project, which NASA refers to as the Voyager mission. And so
you got the
sometimes
t-shirt,
I do have the
so-
t-shirt. This is not a t-shirt from 1972 or 1973, whenever it was I was working on that. But this is the appropriate version of the NASA logo that was being used at that time.
Okay.
Since then, they've switched logos a couple of times, and I have other t-shirts with different versions of the logo on it because
It's changed.
it's
as
always
have
been.
you
I've always
throughout
been
the
a space
years.
cadet, as they say. I took up space in school.
Oh my God.
And on that subject, people who know me know that I done finished the 6th grade.
I'm so proud of you.
That was something that Jethro Bodine used to say on the Beverly Hillbillies. I done graduated the 6th grade.
Did they teach you your 3 R's?
They taught me my timeses and my gazintas. 3 goes into 9 3 times, 3 goes into 12 4 times.
Your 3 R's are your reading, your writing, and your arithmetic. So
Yeah, I learned all about them.
so proud of you.
What happened is that I was a very bad student. Well, I don't know. I was a good student in that I enjoyed learning and I read lots of books. I was a bad student in that I tended to correct my teachers in class
I'm sure
without
they
raising my hand
loved
first.
That.
And they really, really did not enjoy that. And at some point, so the story goes, and I have no confirmation of this, I was the first student in the history of the Los Angeles City school system to get straight fails and yet get moved on to the next grade because none of the teachers wanted to have anything to do with
And
me.
you said you have no confirmation of
I
this.
have no confirmation of this fact.
So it's giving Elon Musk?
No, it's a fact.
How do we know? There's no proof.
I have no idea, but this is the story that I have heard and that I have adopted. And around that same time, around the beginning of the 7th grade, when they were getting tired of me and I was getting tired of them, and it was all mutual, I was also getting tired of my parents. And so at 12 years old, I left home and I lived under various poor circumstances for a number of years. Well, I spent a lot of time in the UCLA Engineering Library teaching myself math and science and electronics because this was fascinating to me. And I have a philosophy that if you let a child do what they want to do, they'll find the thing that's fascinating to them and they will bury themselves in it. And this certainly was true for me. I also, because I was loving math, I would drop into math classes and just, they call this today auditing, but I didn't know that at the time. I would just I
So
would just
maybe you
walk in the
invented
door.
it.
I would just walk in the door, sit in the back row, and listen to the professor teach math or electronics or
Teach
whatever.
math.
I earned some of my living playing piano for retro movie houses on Fairfax in LA that were showing silent movies. I did that for a while. And I also earned some of my living tutoring liberal arts students on their math requirements. And I would find them in the library, and I was probably very annoying about it. I mean, I really don't remember.
Like looking over their shoulder.
Look, you need some help with that. Let me
Be like,
help you.
you're doing
And
that wrong.
if you got $20, that would help. And eventually, I just had a whole list of them that I would tutor. And this lasted a few years. And along the way, I was, learning great stuff in the library and having a blast at it all. Eventually, I met a man named Jim St. Louis, who, unfortunately, at some point in the late 70s, I lost track of him. And I never really did find out what happened to him. But given the age difference, he's probably gone by now. He wasn't very good at taking care of himself anyway. And so, God knows what happened, but I'm very grateful to him. I apprenticed to him for a while, and he taught me a lot about electronics. And then we moved into this house, and we shared a house in Canyon Country, California. It was a 162-acre ranch, and we were hired to just be there. We were considered caretakers, but really our only job was just to make sure the place didn't burn down and keep the pump working for the well. And, again, the owner wasn't there. Jim had somewhere between 25 and 30 cats that shared the space with us. I remember the first time I ever shot a gun was up there. Jim had a 22 rifle. He kept it by the door. And one day the cats had cornered a rattlesnake on the porch of the house. And I grabbed the rifle. Jim wasn't around for some reason. I grabbed the rifle and I pointed it at the rattlesnake and I squeezed the trigger and blew his head off. And
That was a good aim.
well, yeah. I mean, later in life, when I started really taking shooting seriously and learning from some masters, I was told that I just had a preternatural, natural ability to shoot straight.
Straight shooter, if you will.
And, very early in my career of learning to shoot, I got all kinds of awards, and they're hanging in my wall in the other room. It's quite a tangent. Here's that word again, tangent. I did enjoy competitive shooting for a long time. I've never been a right-wing gun nut, but I do have a small collection of. I like handguns, and shooting competitively was really a lot of fun. I don't really do it anymore. I haven't shot in years. Back to our Jim and I at this little house in Canyon Country. We started a business called Music Computer, and the idea was to create electronic musical instruments.
Is it music and computer?
One word.
All one word.
With the common C in the middle.
Okay.
Music Computer.
Music computer.
And,
really rolls right off
of course,
the
it
tongue.
doesn't exist anymore, and I'm sure someone else has taken the name and probably trademarked it. And to those people, I apologize, but we had it first.
We were here first. And what inspired the creation of a company like that?
That's a great question, because I was a guitar player, and I knew how to play a keyboard and I had done so professionally. The lore is that I learned to read and write music before I learned to read and write English. I was given my first guitar when I was 3 years old, and the truth is I don't remember not knowing how to play guitar and keyboard. I don't remember not knowing how to read music. I do remember annoying my stepmother by taking the pieces that she was practicing, like Fur Elise, and just improvising on them, and annoyed the shit out of her.
I see a reoccurring theme.
There is a reoccurring
in your
theme.
Adolescence.
I have a skill. I have a knack. I don't know.
Tendency?
I can be very, very annoying.
Mm-hmm.
This is.
I wouldn't know that personally by any means, but
There you go. But as a guitar player primarily, and you read my bio where it says I play guitar, keyboards, guitar, drums, guitar. Bass.
That's one of my favorite parts of your website.
And as a guitar player, I felt left out of the synthesizer game. And I really wanted to invent, and I eventually did, but I didn't patent it, and we weren't any good at marketing. We were good at building shit. And
Yeah.
eventually Roland came up with the same idea for a hexaphonic guitar pickup that would allow guitar to control a synthesizer. Again, I did it first, but I have no proof. So it's, take that for what it is.
Grain of salt, if you
But
will.
this was the idea behind the business. And in the meantime, we got a few clients and we built some amplifiers and we built different stuff. Building amplifiers, building high quality, high power, clean amplifiers became sort of my thing. And I had a reputation for that. Later in my life, I designed for a company called SAE a couple of their high power sound reinforcement amplifiers, which I think they're still building today. A 50 watt version and a 300 watt version. Today, it's more common to have these switching amplifiers, which are much more efficient, but don't always sound quite as good. And so my amplifiers that I designed for SAE, that was something else I was very proud of. But that was much later than this story, because at some point while Jim and I were living out there on the ranch, somebody referred me to a company, and our time on the ranch was ending. The owner was making noises about throwing us out.
Oh.
And the cats.
Not the cats.
Yes, and the cats.
Oh,
I have
bless
no
them.
idea what happened to Jim and the cats. I know that Jim would have taken very, very good care of the cats, and probably in his will, he insisted that the executors of his estate and bequeathed everything to his cats. Can I make another detour? There was one particular cat. When this cat was born, he was a male cat, and he was all silver, and he was the only, in all of the cats, he was the only silver one. So, who knows where that gene came from? But he was like maybe about this big. I mean, he was not fully grown cat when he first climbed up to the roof of the house, jumped off, and enjoyed it so much that he did it again. So I named him Tarzan.
Oh my gosh.
And Tarzan grew up to be a very big, strong tomcat. I mean, at his prime, he was a big ass cat, and he and I had a special friendship. I would be walking out, around the ranch, and he would come up and he would jump up on my back, perch himself on my shoulder, and just ride along with me as we walked around.
Lazy ass.
But there was one day when I heard all this commotion outside, and there was a coyote, and Tarzan was on the back of the coyote, had the coyote's neck in his teeth, and he had turned on the motor on those back legs like a cat can, and he ripped that coyote to shreds.
Oh my gosh.
This is the only time I've ever heard of a domestic cat killing a coyote. It is usually the other way around, and the coyotes were certainly the reason that our population of cats did not grow into triple digits. I have fond memories of Tarzan the cat. In any event, at some point this was ending.
RIP to the cats.
At some point this was ending, and somebody referred me, a friend of Jim's, and I don't remember his name. I wish I could remember his name. He ended up being my manager at Merit. He referred me to this company, Merit Inc., MERET, Medved Engineering Research and Technology. The RE is research. One of the sons of the owner, I think his name was David Medved. One of his sons is Michael Medved, who's a famous film critic now. And while I was there, Michael was like my age, and he had written a book, The 50 Worst Movies of All Time, about him and his friend who used to get stoned and watch bad movies. David Merritt, David Medved, if I'm remembering his name correctly, he had this consulting firm in Santa Monica, and I was hired to build analog electronics because digital was kind of becoming a thing, and analog engineers were becoming a little bit more rare, and I was very good at it. And I had a reputation for, understanding that particular technology. And they hired me to build these optical electronic transceivers, fiber optic transceivers, for a project for their client was NASA. And here's where NASA comes in. And these were being designed for the Voyager spacecraft, and in particular for Voyager 2, which was the first of the two to be launched. Although I think Voyager 1, they may have started building it first. I really don't know that whole story, why they launched Voyager 2 before Voyager 1.
I'll have to do a little research on it.
But they did. And, I don't know, maybe it's on Wikipedia. I don't know.
always trust Wikipedia.
Yeah, but yeah, because it's so reliable.
Yes, a cited source.
Wikipedia is an amazing thing, and I love Wikipedia. But let's not take that tangent.
So, because you and Jim were doing the music computer, how did Dave discover you guys doing the music computer?
No, it was
thing,
somebody
or-
who worked for Dr. Medved.
Okay.
It was somebody who worked for him and ended up being my manager. I mean, I remember the guy, I remember his face, I remember his attitude, and yet I don't remember his name.
So he knew what you guys were doing.
He knew Jim,
referred you.
and Jim recommended me.
Okay.
Jim was apparently of the impression that the student had surpassed the master. And he recommended me to go and take this job in Santa Monica. And I think, honestly, Jim had no desire to work in that kind of environment. Jim was very much a loner.
Well, and he couldn't bring
and
his cats with him, so.
Right, yeah. They did put up with me walking around barefoot and generally being a hippie teenager in their environment of people wearing coats and ties. And at some point, somebody made up business cards for me that said Bill Weinman, barefoot engineer. And I wish I still had one of those.
I know, especially because now you're bare heart, so you got barefoot. There's so many ways you could intermingle those
The
two.
way that these things converge,
I know.
It's pretty remarkable. So I was hired to work on this project, and I had a lot of fun. And they had a lot of great equipment, which I really, really enjoyed. And at one point, I had designed this circuit that was going to be amplifier part of the transceiver. And my boss, who was the guy that Jim had recommended me to, he was an arrogant son of a bitch with 2 PhDs. And I was the only one there that didn't have letters behind his name. I'm dropped out of the 7th grade, self-taught. There was an attitude at Merit, and also, as I understand it, an attitude at NASA in general, that they didn't care what your credentials were. They didn't care if you're a man or a woman, white or black, whatever. And this is, mind you, late 60s, early 70s. As long as you could do the work, they were going to hire you and they were going to treat you with equality.
I wish that was still a thing.
We've all seen that movie about the women mathematicians. Hidden Figures, yes. And, the truth is, from the people that I know who were there at the time, the whole thing with the bathrooms didn't really happen.
Oh.
NASA was already, pretty agnostic about, and I'm sure at some point, perhaps earlier in time, that was an issue. And there was an issue about women, and there was an issue about black people. And I'm pretty sure by the time of the Apollo program, that was no longer true at NASA. And certainly by the time that I was there, that was no longer an issue. And while I didn't work directly for NASA, we would sometimes go and visit Houston, or we would visit Lawrence Livermore Labs in Northern California, where some of my work was used on the Shiva Laser Fusion Project, which, as I understand it, is still kind of going on. I should have brought it down here. I actually have a man-made rose quartz crystal that is monochromatic.
Oh, wow.
Which is very rare. And it's the only reason that they made these crystals, which was used in the lasers for Shiva. And this is all from that. So many fascinating things these guys had their hands in, and I got to see and be involved in. But getting back to Voyager.
Well, I was going to add one thing. You're over here talking about working for NASA and, visiting Houston. My experience was
because you live in Texas and you've been to Houston.
Yes. So we visited on like a high school field trip. So I must have been like a junior in high school, and we go to the NASA location in Houston. And it wasn't until we were halfway through our tour around that I realized, Houston, we have a problem.
Houston, we have a problem.
Because there was NASA in Houston. So carry on.
I've heard the recordings, and it's amazing to me. I think it was Jim Lovett, the astronaut, who said the famous words, "Houston, we have a problem." He was the commander of Apollo 13. They should have skipped the number 13. Like an elevator.
Yeah.
They should have gone from 12 to 14. Mm-hmm. But there they were. And to hear how calm his voice was, to me, I mean, imagining myself in a tin can orbiting the Earth, no way that any help was going to come to rescue us, knowing pretty certainly that I was going to die up there. I don't know if I would have been that calm. I also knew people who were in the control room when Apollo 1 blew up on the launch pad. And oh my God, to hear those people and the crack in their voices when they talk about it, because they were actually friends with those astronauts. Another tangent.
It's what we do best.
That's part of the theme of this show, isn't it? There I was.
No shit, there I was.
At this, and I had designed this circuit that was going to be the amplifier for the fiber optic transceiver. And in order to fabricate it, which was also my responsibility to actually build the damn thing, I had to get approval from the chief engineer, and the chief engineer was the guy with the attitude.
Can we give him a name?
Bob.
Bob. I love it.
Pretty sure that's not his name.
And by I love it, I mean I hate it.
Yeah, well, Bob. You know, I mean.
So Bob,
whose name is an anagram for Bob, and anyway, he calls me into his lab. We didn't have offices, we had labs. And he went to the chalkboard because we didn't have whiteboards back then. I mean, we're talking 1974, maybe? 1973. Doing the math.
it's official.
Yeah, 1973. And he starts scribbling all over the chalkboard. He's explaining to me why my circuit won't work, right? He fills the chalkboard in an attempt to intimidate me with all kinds of higher math. And if I were to look at that today, I really wouldn't know what it is. I look back at some of my notebooks today from that period, and I'm like, how the hell did I understand that shit? Because I haven't really used my higher math since. But at the time, it was fresh in my mind, you know, from my time hanging out at the UCLA Engineering Library and auditing those courses. And I looked at the whole chalkboard filled with all of this stuff. And there was one integral equation where he had flipped two of the operators. And I took the eraser and I put them in the right order. And he looked at it and he says, "Oh shit, you're right."
He admitted on the spot.
Oh yeah, yeah. He hated it though. I mean, there was fires and laser jets coming out of his eyes, and yeah. We also had a coworker who worked at fabricating the fiber optic cables, because today we think of fiber optics and it's like we've got fiber optic cables under the oceans, and you know, in my Thunderbolt cables for my computer.
You can get them installed in your houses for like
internet.
Yeah,
you can get fiber internet to your house. But in those days, it was brand new technology.
Right.
And we had this woman, an engineer. She was a Soviet defector. And her name was Natasha because, of course.
Yes. Not to, you know, be stereotypical, but we love that
She
for
was 6'3".
Oh, my.
Blonde, substantial woman.
Yes.
And we would go to lunch, and she would order vodka, not water, vodka, and she would drink a 12-ounce glass of vodka for lunch.
Water and vodka?
No, vodka. They don't pronounce their V's.
Oh.
She would drink a big old glass of vodka for lunch.
Love that.
And I know this sounds like a stereotype, but this was actually true.
Where do you think the stereotypes come from, though?
Yeah, really. And then she'd go back to work, and she was a blast. She was so much fun to work with. And here comes the part where I got fired.
Oh.
I had gone ahead and I had built the circuits, and they were fine, and they worked.
After Bob told you that you were right, did he give you his approval?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure that wasn't a part of you being fired.
So in those days, I mean, today you look at electronic circuits and they're all created by machines and they're all made by robots. But these days, like so many things the human element has been automated out, but there was originally a human element. And we had these little strips of black tape that you would mark up. So you had a substrate of fiberglass with copper on top of it, and perhaps on the bottom if it was two-sided. We didn't do much two-sided. We had one-sided circuits. And you would mark up the actual, you do this on a drafting table. First you design the circuit on a drafting table with drafting pens.
Obviously,
and,
yes.
this is where my fetish for mechanical pencils comes from, because I always use a mechanical pencil because I like the feel of it. But this is where that came from, because I used to do this as part of my job as an engineer. And then you would take that pattern and you would mark up the copper plate with this tape, this special black tape that was like 1/8 of an inch thick, for all of the traces of where the circuit was going to go to. And then you would cover it with a what's called a resistor, the chemical resistance, and then you would pull the tape off. And all the places where the chemical resistance was or wasn't, or it would get, then it would get exposed to there was a camera involved, and there was like a light room or a dark room and all this stuff. And eventually this chemical process would remove all the places where the traces weren't.
Okay.
And I'm probably getting a lot of the details of this wrong because it's been so long ago, and nobody does it this way anymore. And there we were.
And how do you feel about that? No, I'm just kidding.
I'm excited. I love how far along we've come. There was a time, maybe just a few years after that, like 2 or 3 years after that, when I was working at another company that made cardiac pacemakers. And we were actually involved in designing and proofreading the designs of a microprocessor, and seeing how far it had come in just a few years from doing this to actually having computers design these microchips was absolutely amazing. But this is the way that we did it at the time. We had discrete components. We had resistors and transistors and stuff, and we put on those. And the circuit worked. And proof of concept, it worked. And we had it in boxes and testing it out. And everybody was very, very happy. And Natasha drunk vodka. And then came the thing where I had an idea that I thought was hilarious, which turned out not to be hilarious to other people. I asked Natasha to teach me how to write "made in the USSR" in Cyrillic letters in Russian, and I etched that into my circuit board without telling anybody.
Shame, Bear.
And this circuit board that's going to go on a NASA rocket with an American flag on the side of it during the space race and during the Cold War. And I just thought that was a hilarious idea.
You know what? I'm just going to...
And not my direct boss, Bob. No, Dr. Medved called me into his office and was furious. Steam coming out the ears, lasers coming out the eyes. I mean, and that was my last day at Merit.
And obviously you didn't have to pack anything or, grab your
I
shoes.
probably had some flip-flops,
Oh, good. So we made some progress
I may
while you
have
were
had
there.
some carrot juice in the refrigerator. I used to drink when I was a teenager, I used to drink so much carrot juice that my palms turned orange.
Well, and I'm sure it gave your skin an orange tint too.
Well, yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah. I'm sure it was very popular with the ladies.
So you got hired by a contractor by NASA. And then the time frame between getting hired and getting fired was...
I don't know, maybe a year and a half.
Okay.
Because I mean, there was a lot of fun, and there were a lot of different things that we were involved in. We were involved in a project in San Diego called Tokamak.
Well, I mean, you weren't anymore.
Well, during my time there, I remember going and being part of these excursions to these places. So again, it's so long ago, I don't really remember all the details, but I imagine I must have been involved in some form of it, or they wouldn't have paid for my plane flights to go to these places to see these things. And Tokamak was like the other part of the fusion reactor from Shiva, which was at Lawrence Livermore Labs in Northern California. And today, Lawrence Livermore Labs is called something else. It's still Livermore something, but then we called it L cubed. But down in San Diego, there was this other lab where they were going to create the magnetic bottle that was going to contain the fusion reaction. And I understand that they're still trying to do it this way.
The magnetic what?
Bottle.
Bottle.
So there's a fusion
Bottle.
reaction. Fission is when you split a hydrogen atom and all of its energy comes out and it destroys cities or whatever.
Oh, okay.
Right. And our nuclear reactors that we use today, which, by the way, are very environmentally friendly and very efficient, and we ought to be building more of them and not fewer of them. But the nuclear reactors that we use today use fission. They split the atom, and that is, where they get the energy from. Fusion, in theory, would be far more efficient and wouldn't create as many byproducts that are dangerous like we have with fission. And again, modern fission reactors, the byproducts aren't as bad or as plentiful. The days of 3 Mile Island or what's the place in the one in Russia that melted down?
Chernobyl?
Yeah, Chernobyl. The days of those things,
right.
or even Fukushima, because that was such an old and outdated reactor and they knew it had problems. And they shouldn't have been running it. They should have replaced it decades ago. But those days are really pretty much behind us, and fission is pretty efficient and pretty clean today. But fusion would be, more efficient and more clean. And fusion, what fusion is when you take 2 or more hydrogen atoms and smash them together, as opposed to splitting them apart. And honestly, that's as much of the physics of it as I understand.
I was just about to say, and that's your physics lesson for
right.
today, folks.
I am no physicist. I don't claim to be. I'm not Elon Musk with a pretend physics degree.
I was a dance major in college, and they made me take physics because...
And I would have gladly tutored you in your math requirements.
I would not have in a million years been like, you know what? This 12-year-old, he knows what's up. So...
Yeah. But, I was good at explaining it, and that's what, I didn't realize at the time that was a lot of my calling, is to be a teacher and to be able, on subjects that I know about, not physics. My eldest child, Dee, took physics in college and really, really liked it and considered majoring in it, ended up majoring in computer security instead. And could probably explain fusion a little better than I do. But in any event, they were working on the fusion reactor up in Livermore with the lasers, and somehow that's supposed to make the hydrogen atoms fuse, and then to contain the reaction, because you need to contain it, and to be able to convert that energy into heat or electricity or whatever we're going to use. And for that, this other project down in San Diego called Tokamak. And Tokamak was a giant, and when I say giant, a toroidal transformer. And so a transformer is like wound wires around a core, right? And toroidal means that the core is a toroid. It's the shape of like a donut. And the wires were wrapped around that, and the wires were literally a meter thick.
Oh, my.
And
for those that don't use...
3 feet.
Thank
roughly.
you.
A meter is roughly a yard.
I know.
And
just being funny.
And this whole thing was contained in a building with walls that were like 5 meters thick of concrete. Thick, very, very thick. I'm 2 meters tall, right? So, and when they fired this thing up, the copper wires, these meter thick, 3 feet thick copper wires, would literally explode and burst off of this thing and embed themselves in the concrete walls. That's how much power it wasn't working at the time, and that's how much power was involved.
I was about to ask, is that how it's supposed to go?
No, it's not how it's supposed to go.
Okay.
But engineering is very much like baseball. in that it's about managing failure,
Yep.
right? If people don't know, my theory of baseball is that baseball is about managing failure. You've got 162 games. You're going to lose at least a third of them, right? And you're going to win a third, you're going to lose a third, and it's those ones in the middle that matter. Every time you step up to the plate, even the best of hitters are going to strike out, a quarter of the time, and they're only going to hit the damn ball a third of the time, right? So it's all very much about managing failure. And engineering is the same way. Sometimes you just got to build something that you know isn't going to work so that you can figure out, you can observe and get an idea of what are the modes of failure and what is it that's causing those modes of failure, and just chip away at them over time until you get something that you understand and that works. And so engineering is very much like baseball, about managing failure. So anyway, I had a lot of fun in that year and a half at the NASA
Very
subcontractor.
short-lived.
until I joked my way out of it.
Gave you the boot.
And to this day, when I hear about the Voyager spacecraft, both of them really, but especially about number 2.
Even though it was number
Ooh,
1.
I said number 2.
You're number 2. You're number 2.
We're number 2. I have a lot of pride and a lot of nostalgia. And, just the idea that I got to work on something that the whole purpose of Voyager was to take this time capsule of the human experience. It had the gold record with the different sounds on it and the picture of the Vitruvian, naked man and woman and a hydrogen atom and some prime numbers and all of this stuff on this record. And to carry that slice of humanity out into the stars and into the unknowable future, because at the speed the damn thing is going, it's not going to reach another star for, I don't know, at least 100 years. And maybe longer. I really haven't plotted out or done the math on the speed of it. But our nearest star is several light years away. I think it's like 3 or 4 light years away, which is how far at the speed of light, how long it would take. It would take years. And at the speed of these Voyager spacecraft, it's going to take, many decades. But somewhere down the line, thousands, millions, billions of years from now, somebody's going to recover one of these things. And if it's intact, which we hope it will.
Fingers crossed.
And from what I have heard, from what I've been able to discern, my electronics that I built with my own hands is still functioning on the Voyager 2 spacecraft. This 17-year-old hippie.
If that 17-year-old could only
If
see
I only
you now.
had any idea, I probably would have just, fainted or something. Anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
How did I know you were going to say that?
So this thus wraps up another episode.
Another one.
Of Bearheart Studios presents. I don't remember. Bearheart Studios presents the International Geek of Mystery Show.
The Bearheart Labs.
Bearheart Labs. Bearheart Studios. Bearheart Studios is in the other room. Bearheart Labs presents International. Someday I'm gonna get used to this crazy ass title. But there we are, another episode in the can. I would like to thank Kirsten, my co-host.
You're Kirsten.
You're Kirsten.
Yeah, my Kirsten.
Oh, Kirsten,
you can't
my
hour.
Kirsten.
Yeah, Kirsten, my co-host, and Ricky behind the camera and the controls, and all of you for spending some of your precious time with us. We really appreciate that.
Your
Thank
artificially
you, and
shortened attention
all
span.
done. This podcast is copyright 2023 by the Bearheart Group, LLC. Bearheart Labs is a brand of the Bearheart Group, and our podcasts are produced at our studios here in fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. Our podcast producer is Rickiana Denning, a.k.a. Ricky. Our co-host and hardworking administrator is Kirsten Hilgendorf, and I'm Bearheart. On behalf of all of us here at Bearheart Labs, thank you for listening to our podcast. We hope to have you back again soon.